Welcome, welcome, everyone. My colleague Krista from the IMP uh, Professional Development Committee is here with me, co-hosting. So I'm gonna give her the microphone to continue. Welcome, everyone.
I will say a quick hello and welcome. I'm Krista Kusuma. I was with the professional development team and now I am leading the brand new or fairly new, but super active community building team. And we are responsible for the listserv. So if you're not already on the listserv, that's, I think, one of the topics for today. I am the Zoom moderator, so I'm going to manage the chat today if you drop questions or ideas. And otherwise, I'm going to turn the mic over to IMPs.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amparo Leyman Pino. My colleagues, my friend call me Ampi, so you're my friends, you're my colleagues, so please do so. And I'm super excited here to be hosting and sharing the stage with two very dear colleagues, Paul Orselli and Sari Boren. Can you introduce yourselves?
Go ahead, Sari.
Oh, okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Sari Boren. I am an independent museum professional. I'm an exhibit developer and writer. And I have done a lot of different things, but I have been working independently since 2013, and I'm based in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Thank you, Sari.
Hello, I'm Paul Orselli. I'm tuning in from POW, World Headquarters on Long Island. POW stands for Paul Orselli Workshop, and I develop exhibits and museums that hold exhibits. That's my work. And I'm excited to be here today also.
Thank you, Paul. And as I said, my name is Amparo Leyman Pino. I'm the principal and founder of Yellow Cow Consulting, a consulting firm based in San Francisco and Barcelona, or Barcelona and San Francisco. And we're focused on helping organizations to become more inclusive and welcoming. So, and yeah, it's a privilege and an honor to be here with all of you. For those of you who have just joined this virtual room, my colleague Krista Kusuma, sorry, who leads the IMP community building team, will be monitoring the chat and helping with some logistics. So I'm very appreciative of her. By the way, I recruited as a volunteer. So if you want to volunteer with IMPs, raise your hand. We're gonna share with you a lot of the information about IMPs today. And I'm gonna invite you to put in the chat something about you, your name, what you do, where you're based, and start writing. And when I said go, hit send. So it's gonna be like a confetti of contacts. So put your name, where are you based, what do you do? Or if you're not in a place where you're not based, also share with us. Like me, I'm in Mexico City. I'm from Mexico City, but I'm here for work and family. So for those who just joined, please write your name, where you're from, and when I say go, we're gonna hit send and we're gonna see a confetti of colleagues and their information in the chat. Awesome. All right, are you ready? With your name and go. Share who you are on the chat. Ole. That's super cool. I love when this happens.
Oh, wow.
Awesome. People who volunteer at museums, people who are
Wow,
in
and
Canada.
we're crossing borders. We have both
Yeah.
Mexico and Canada represented on this call this morning.
Some neighbors of yours, sorry, somebody in Boston.
Yes.
New York City, they're closer to you. Oh, oh wow, a lot of people from Canada. Thank you.
Cool.
Wonderful. This is so great. Um, so perhaps, Krista, we can put up the slides so we can share with our colleagues that we are the independent museum professionals. This is a network of consultants and people who identify themselves as freelancers who work in all areas of museums and with all type of museums. If you work with children's museums, put a happy face. If you work with historic museums, put a party face. If you work with science centers, put a heart. You know, these things. And if you work with every kind of museums, put an. So this is a network where we provide, it's a central hub for resources, knowledge, and connections. And these webinars that we're having, like today or the next one that is going to be about mistakes we make, we will talk about later about that. It's for us to learn from each other and to connect with each other and to support each other, strengthen these relationships, right? Being an independent consultant sometimes is very lonely, and that's what we're going to talk today in this webinar. But for most, we have learned the power of people with a lot of expertise, like all of you, who help the field to advance and to get further and more interesting. But as I said, if you're interested in getting involved in this network, we will provide more information at the end of the session so you can become a volunteer here as well. Oh, I love the emojis on the screen. Awesome. So today we're gonna talk about how to build networks of support. That's our topic. And Krista has put in the chat our website and the email so you can connect with us as with the network and participate more actively, let's say that. All right. So that's where IMPs are. And then perhaps we can start the meat of the session today. Awesome. So it occurred to us to talk about the networks of support because being an independent museum professional, as I said, sometimes could be or feel lonely or talking to yourself. So how to avoid those things. So if you can give me the next slide, Krista, please. Thank you. So I'm an alum from the Noise Leadership Institute when I was working at the Bay Area Discovery Museum as their director. And when I did the program, I learned from Gino Schnell that it's important to always have people in your close to you, because also leadership is very lonely, that can help you in these 4 C's: comfort, challenge, clarify, and celebrate. And with these 4 C's, I took the program in 2013. And with these 4 C's, I started like making more systematic and professionalized mentorship, right? To find people that could help me with comfort, challenge, clarify, and celebrate. That was not a relative, who is not a partner, right? Or a friend, rather a colleague that could help me in these 4 C's. And when I founded and let's say created Yellow Cow as because I've been consulting since 2000, but when I incorporated and created a business in making more solid, I also thought that it would be good that the mentorship will become more consistent. So Krista, can you share my next slide? Thank you. So I have the idea that these mentors that I had to make it part of an advisory board for my company. So I recruited these 7 people. There are other 2 people that are not here, which are my financial advisor and my legal advisor. They don't want to be shown in this website. So there's 2 people. Nah, they support me, but they don't want to be publicly my mentor. So I know, well, he's laughing, but these people agreed to be part of these 4 C's for me. So it's they're colleagues who I know very well, people who I admire a lot, people who challenge me in many ways, right? So and people who can give me a perspective, a bigger perspective of my practice, as my focus is in content development for exhibits, programs, curriculum with an inclusive lens. And so I chose them, and there are also people who are not in the field, right? For example, Louise Anderson, she used to work for the Swedish Exhibition Agency, but now she is doing more like policy making and more things for the city of Stockholm and more in politics and arts. But her perspective and her point of view, it's always substantial and challenges me a lot, right? Or my friend Charismatic, that's her real name. Her first name is Charis and her last name is Matic. So Charis, she's in business development. She is a guru in technology. She is now doing a lot of things on AI for the company she works for, one big corporate American company. And always talking to her and soundboarding ideas because she's not from the field is very refreshing. And of course, people with a lot of experience in the field like Orna, Andreas, Micah, and Sheena. And I also chose Vanessa Mignan, who is also an independent museum professional like me on inclusion. So she might be perceived as my competition in a way, but because we are working in projects that are very similar, it's very good for us to support each other. So I meet with this board twice a year. I report to them the projects that I have finished, the ones that are in my pipeline, the challenges that I have encountered, and they always bring a question that I need to come back and show results of what the yellow cow is doing. For example, in the future meeting, I need to show a graphic where I can see my revenue versus the type of projects, so I can see where the best money is coming from and where I'm using better my skills and creating this revenue for the yellow cow, right? And how these projects are meeting or not my mission and yeah, the focus for my company. So for me it's a privilege. It's hard because they are volunteering. We have a pact of bringing also abundance for them. I just finished a 6-week project with Sheena at the Experimentarium through my Fulbright. So I use my Fulbright to benefit her organization for 6 weeks. I created an exhibition with Orna Cohen. So we are also collaborating in other things. We created this beautiful exhibition about children in dialogue, Kinder in Dialogue in Hamburg, which is about empathy as a building block for inclusion, and it's an exhibition for children 3 to 7. So we're always collaborating and making things stronger. I have a lot of sessions with Micah and his team at the Museum of Us, and I just paid a visit to Luis. So we're always helping each other and growing together, which is one of the pacts that we have or agreements that we have. So I report to them, they bring me value, but I also think of ways to collaborate with them and bring value to their lives as well. So I hope this prompts some ideas to you, and I'm gonna turn it over to my colleague and friend, Sari Boren.
Thank you. So I am going to talk a little differently about a variety of networks. And for people who came in a little later and might not have heard, I'm independent exhibit developer and writer. So that's the kind of work that I'm doing for a variety of museums. And if you can go to the next slide, please. So, I'm going to talk in some ways, there's some overlap between, what MPs just talked about, but maybe less impressive in terms of how well organized it is. But the first thing I want to say is about sharing skills and support in networks beyond your museum people. And what's in the photographs here is my comics group. And this is a group that formed a couple of weeks into lockdown in 2020. And it's 5 women, we're all creative writers. And we meet weekly and we draw comics together based on Linda Barry's book, Making Comics. We're inspired by her. And so this has been going on for about over 4.5 years weekly. And not only do I work independently, but I also live alone. And so, this idea of like, even if you have a house full of people, you're probably alone in an office and there is a lot of isolation. And so having this weekly session with these women, two of whom I didn't even know super well beforehand, but are now among my closest friends. What it does is it's emotional support, obviously. It is something in the schedule where I know I'm actually engaging with people weekly in creative work that nobody is paying me for, and it doesn't have to be any good. And it is this just activity of creativity. We also spend about the first 15 minutes kind of checking in with each other. And so in terms of this kind of emotional support and just putting schedule into your work, this has been so vital for me. And if you could see at the bottom, we do an attendance card at the beginning, which is a self-portrait. And we all did attendance cards of us as Mudang. So that's me as Mudang with curly hair, if you can see on the hippo. A little hard to tell. But also in like sort of a less formal way, I have a lot of smart friends, and in an informal way, we do provide support to each other with professional expertise. Part of it is really, I think, being clear with yourself about what are your strengths and your weaknesses, in running your own business. And for me, like, I know that negotiating is not one of my strengths, or sometimes being able to suss out what's happening in complicated institutional politics is not one of my strengths. But I have some friends who are really good at that. And I tend to contact them when I'm in a situation where I can use some advice. And my skill set very much is writing and editing, is like a skill set that works for people not in the museum field. And so very similarly, I will call them for work. People will contact me and ask if I could read something, if I can edit something, even friends of mine who have full-time jobs who are not independent. But it is about identifying your own skills, the skills of your friends, and having these kind of networks where you can support each other. I think another issue about working on your own in the isolation is really accountability for your work. And so this idea of co-working over Zoom or in person, I know there's somebody in IMP, and I forget her name, and she's on the programming committee, who does have like a co-working thing, I think weekly, and I do want to sign up for it. I tend to co-work doing creative writing with my friends one-on-one, and we have a very structured process for how we do that for accountability. And I do think, like, right here, all of us in network together, it's really important to sort of recognize what the challenges are, is that we're not superheroes, and sometimes you get off task. I find the less work I have, the more likely, I'm going to get off task. I know it's very useful for me to have something first thing in the morning. Otherwise, I might do what my mother calls potchking around and sort of wander around the house and like reorganize drawers rather than sit down at my desk. And like this sort of self-knowledge about your own work is part of this idea of networking, which is like making sure I have things on my schedule first thing in the morning, or just recognizing that we're not that the way that we work is different, and that to recognize for yourself what are the kinds of support that you might need, whether it's on like a yearly basis, like with this formal advisory board you're talking about, or on a weekly basis, or on a monthly or a daily basis, like what allows you to do the work the way that you want to work and not just feel like you're carrying everything on your own. And then going to the next slide, was talking about nurturing long-term relationships. And I realized that for people who are new to the field, I know what this feels like. It feels very frustrating for people to say this. You're like, oh, so I have to wait 5 years or whatever. But it is, we're very lucky to work in such a congenial field. And even though some of us are, say, in competition with each other for work, it doesn't always feel like that, you know, to me. And I've been in the field now for 30 years. And these long-term relationships are really important. The photos at the top are me and Margaret Middleton and me and Paul in Alaska with a reindeer. And I'm showing these pictures because I met both Margaret and Paul independently at conferences and have been friends with them for years. And Paul and I have just worked together for the first time on a project today. Today, we had a Zoom meeting for a project working together, and we've probably known each other for 15 or 20 years, if not longer. Margaret and I have also, I met Margaret because they did an amazing presentation in ACM once, I'm sure more than once, but I went up after a presentation. I was like, that was incredible. And we became friends. And a year and a half ago, I ended up hiring Margaret to help me on a project. Turned out Margaret had more expertise than I did for that project. So I became the hero who brought Margaret onto the project. And, you know, this idea that like this non-transactional relationships where we are in community together, and that's why IMP is so important. The other thing I was going to say is really thinking about from a professional sense to identify like where you can get work. I used to think I had to be hired by museums, and then it took me a little while to realize, oh no, I get hired by design firms. You know, like that's sort of like my best path. Also, museum might love my work, but they don't have a project for another 5 years. But when I get hired by design firms and we work well together, they hire me over and over. And another element of this networking, again, recognizing is trying to learn the skills to enter and adapt other work cultures. So when I work on a project, I'm having to adapt to the culture of the design firm, and then we're adapting into the culture of the client. And I'm showing a picture here of me with members from GSM Project, which is a design firm in Montreal. They're fabulous. But, you know, it's a Quebecois firm, and I love these guys, but like they're more so than say some other design firms I entered. The culture was very different, and it took me a little while to kind of get my footing to understand how to work with them. And you know, maybe it's something we talk about at the end of questions, but one thing that I'm starting to wonder about is creating a more formal way of kind of entering these cultures. And yes, so I think that's pretty much all I'm going to talk about here, and I'm going to pass this over to Paul.
Thank you. Hello. I'll just take a little pause for the cause and say, if you have questions that were prompted by Ampis or Sari's presentations, or as I'm going along my presentation, feel free to put them into the chat after I'm done talking, and we maybe have a little housekeeping. We'll sort of open up to questions and discussion. So I'm going to talk today, just building on what Sari said about friends and sort of non-transactional, like non-immediately work-driven relationships. I'm just going to talk about sharing, just because I think that is one of the strengths that I've found that separates museum work maybe from other kinds of work. It feels like even when I was at the start of my career, if I had a question and I reached out to somebody in a sincere way, I often got a really useful answer, which just made me feel good. So next slide, please. So sharing is caring. I'm also the father of 4 now grown-ups. And so I reflexively, you know, going through school and going with kids, you think sharing is caring. But lest you think my presentation is going to be sort of like everything I learned about independent museum practice, I learned in kindergarten. It's not going to be like that. Next slide, please. It's more influenced by somebody like this. This is a book called Show Your Work by an author and writer named Austin Kleon, who coincidentally is based in Austin, Texas. But he's a really good resource, I think. If you look him up on his website, you can find out about his work. And he puts out a weekly email newsletter that you can sign up for free, where he highlights 10 things that are interesting things he's been thinking about that he shares. And I find a lot of value in him and his work, but the point of this book, Show Your Work, is that a lot of creative people, when they are working independently, they don't really share and show their work. And showing our work, not in a bragging way or a like slimy promotional way, like, you know, you're a used car salesman, but just as a way to celebrate your work and to let people know what you're about. You know, if somebody sees your work and it resonates with them, like Sari said, she went up to Margaret after the presentation and said, wow, that was great. It's a way for people to learn about you and your work and to really find those ways to connect with you, then in a transactional way for work. Next slide, please. So I just made this little Venn diagram because I think a lot about ways to share. And as I was preparing for this webinar, I thought about the ways that I share my work. You know, there are online ways, and I have a website, of course. I have a blog. I have a YouTube channel. I am on social media. But though I sort of choose my tools, and honestly, in the advice section here, I would say, you know, it's not important from my perspective, like which tools you use online to share your work and to share the way you do work with people. But I do think it is important that you have a strong online presence. Could just be LinkedIn. Doesn't matter. How are people going to find out about you and your work and find a way to connect with you as a potential creative partner? That's definitely online. And then looking for opportunities, again, like Sari mentioned, you know, a lot of times I'll present at a conference and people will come up to me. I just started a job again just a few weeks ago, but the person first encountered me at a conference years and years ago, and that presentation, fortunately, stuck with that person in a positive way. So looking for ways to engage with people live, conferences, teaching, professional meetups. I love, there are in many cities meetups like drinking about museums, where museum professionals and independents just meet up at a local restaurant or a bar just to chit chat and talk shop. I mean, it's important to engage that way. And then we have these sort of hybrid events and things like this webinar where it's sort of on the cusp between live in a way and online. So, you know, thinking about and doing, like a lot of times if people contact me and they're interested in becoming independent museum professionals, one of the first questions I ask is, you know, what's your online presence? Like, how are people going to find out about you? If you search Paul Orselli, spoiler alert, you're going to find my webpage and my social media. That's great. But what if you're looking for an interactive museum designer in New York and you don't know me from Adam? I want you to be able to find me that way too. And so if you have only one takeaway from this part of the presentation, it's like, think about your online presence. It's a good way to share your work, but it's also a good way to get work. Next slide, please. And ultimately, I guess what I think about as a way to feel less isolated as primarily a one-man band, although I create teams and connect on teams, is thinking about the way to stay on what I call people's radar screens. I think what both Hampis and Sari said is really apt. You know, if you get into a groove with a design company or with a other creative partner, they're likely to want to work with you again and again, which is super, you know? So a lot of times by staying on people's radar screens, have gotten work. Like they do the prospecting, and then after they get the gig or when they're near to getting the gig, they're like, oh, this is perfect. We want you to work on the gig with us. So that's great. One of the worst possible encounters I had when I first became an independent museum professional, and I wasn't on a lot of radar screens. I went to a conference and this person started describing this project that they had just finished. And they were like, oh, you would have been perfect to work on that project with us, like would in the past tense. And I was like, oh, I resolved after I had a couple of encounters like that. I don't want to be on the back end of a project like somebody thinks after the project's over, oh, you would have been perfect. I want them when they're developing the project to think about me. And so again, you know, how can you put yourself out there, whether you're a new independent museum professional or a seasoned independent museum professional? How can you share your work? How can you share with other people? How can you be viewed as a resource and a strong creative partner, so that when people are gathering up projects, they think of you first, not afterwards? So staying on radar screens, that's super important. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Sari. And I'm very grateful that you accept to be part of this panel, but foremost to bring these different perspectives. And I hope this is bringing also value to all of you here in this virtual room. And I will open the floor for people to put your questions in the chat. That way we can see how and who's gonna answer it. So please don't be shy. I read, thank you so much for the suggestion on adapting to other work cultures. That's a great topic. We can consider it, and we will pass along this amazing idea to the Professional Development Committee of the IMPs community.
I did want to, while we're waiting for questions, I'll just quickly jump onto what Paul was saying about staying on people's radar. I'll be honest, I mean, I've been in the field for 30 years. I've been independent for 11 years, and I felt uncomfortable like promoting my work on social media. I thought social media was like for friends, and I was on LinkedIn, but I wasn't active. I was on Facebook. And then Paul knows this story. You know, there was the pandemic, so we didn't go to conferences. And then I actually went back to grad school during the pandemic. And so when the first New England Museum Association conference came up in person, I actually couldn't go because my thesis was due the following week, and I didn't want to have a nervous breakdown. But then I went to NEMA last year, and this sort of insane thing happened to me, that people who have known me in the field for 20 years, like I found out several people were like, we thought you left the field. And like, it was the combination of the pandemic, but like, I wasn't posting about work as I don't know. I'm just saying this to not feel like it's weird. Maybe it's because I'm older and people who are younger don't feel that. But that was like a real kick in the pants for me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And so then I did an end of year post on LinkedIn where I did a collage with images of all the projects I worked on and like listed them and said, oh, you know, but it's just to say, if you feel a little uncomfortable about it, don't. because I made that mistake and I was really shocked that people who knew me well thought I was no longer working the field just because I was not posting about my work on social media and had not gone to a conference in 2 years.
Wonderful.
w-
Thank
w-
you for sharing that.
some folks submitted questions when they were signing up for the webinar. And I don't know, Ampis and Sari, if you'll indulge me, one of them really stuck out for me. And maybe I can ask that question and respond to it, and I'd be interested in your answers too. It's maybe a little tangential to this, but I thought it was a good question. The question was, what was or what has been the best advice about being an independent museum professional that you ever received? I like that question. And
What's your answer? What's
well,
your
I'll
answer?
tell you, it immediately prompted an answer for me, which was career advice. Believe it or not, that came from my father. And occasionally he would see, especially at the start of my career in museums, he would see that I would run into frustrations or things that might make me a little bit upset about working in a situation. And what he said, I continue to think about that as it relates to my independent museum professional work, which is, he said, you know, if someone or some situation upset you, in the future, when you are in the position to do something differently, like, what will you do? And so I think about that, because I think about when I was first starting out in the museum business, when I would reach out to people, man, and some people would be very gracious, and you know, even if they would just respond in a short way, it really sort of made you feel like it was less of you against the world. And some people just you could never get a response from. And so I think, just hearkening to what I talked about, I really try, if somebody reaches out to me, and I'll just throw this invitation out, perhaps unadvisedly, to the whole group here. I'm happy to continue the conversation beyond this webinar if anything resonates with what I spoke about. But I just love that piece of advice from my father. You know, take what might have been something that was frustrating or a difficult situation with a person for you in a work situation, and then when you encounter that again, or you're in a situation to maybe do things differently, what will you do differently? So how about you, Sari or Ampis? What's
I was going to
the
take the
best piece
ball.
of independent museum professional advice you've gotten so far in your career?
Yeah, for me, actually, it came from Orna Cohen, who sits in my advisory board, and she told me you need to define your niche. I think for me that um, advice was crucial, right? Because I have working in informal learning and in informal learning, in exhibits and programs and this and that, and I have my bilingual superpowers and other things. But she was like, focus, find your niche. What is your niche? And leverage that. Find the thing that connects it all. What is the Lord of the Rings of all your skills that will create that niche, right? And my mother, all the time, she said, Ampis made up her own career. Nobody has that career in the world. She made it up. She exaggerates because she's my mom, right? And she sees things with a lot of love. But that was precisely the advice that Orna gave me. What of all the things that a lot of people do like you, what's your niche, right? And even with Vanessa, who I adore, and as I said, we could be perceived as competitors, but we're not, because I have my niche, right? We do things in inclusion, we do trainings, we use sometimes the same tools, but I have my niche, he has hers, and we don't step on each other's courts. And that has been really good. And even to pitch projects, when I pitch, let's say intentionally or unintentionally, I have gotten projects just talking to someone like, oh, I met your neighbor, I went with him on a date, and I'm like, how do you know my neighbor? Or I know this, or oh, we were talking about what I do, and I do this. Oh, I need someone like you at my museum. It was like that, right? It's, you never know when you pitch, but when you have your niche, it's easier to tell people what you do, and it's easier for people to perceive what you can be helpful for that project, if any, right? So yeah, for me, that it's been very nice advice and very helpful. And what about you, Sari?
Well, I was sitting here trying to think, and I do think the best advice I ever got was from my father years ago. My father is no longer with us, that he ran a business, a manufacturing business, and he said everything in business is relationships. He said everything is relationships. So, and so I've always believed and carried that with me. I see that Todd Cross has posted a question that I feel so qualified to answer, because Todd, I had the exact same situation that my first career, I worked in video production, but not as accomplished as you, because this is like in my 20s, but I worked in corporate media. So Todd's question is about like transferring his skill set from one professional domain, broadcast news, into the museum world. And, you know, so this was a long time ago. This is like 30 years ago, but I found the same wall. I was trying to move. I think it was harder for me from corporate video, like where I was making videos for like banks and supermarkets. And I was interested in moving into educational media, and I hit a lot of walls. I ended up going back to school and doing a master's in education. That is not the advice I'm going to give you, because that would be incredibly annoying. I do believe, as open as the museum field is, it is funny how sometimes people can't perceive transferable skills. I think my advice would be to, I don't know I don't see where you are, Todd, because there's so many people on here. If you've approached museums directly, or if you've approached media firms that do a lot of museum work, I would think the latter would be better, or to try to have relationships with people who are doing museum work and try to partner with them, you know, to sort of piggyback with somebody who has those, to offer to be maybe more junior than you would normally be on somebody else's work project to help them out, is one suggestion I would have. If Todd,
Yeah.
if you want to chime in at all.
I think, Sari, what you just said, Todd, approaching a media company who does work with museums, that might be an easier way to, you know, you're sort of already speaking the same or a similar language with a media company, and then they can bring you work or bring you in on work on museum projects, and then you are starting to build that museum media portfolio.
And I think that also it's people, if you give, if you share this sharing and caring that Paul was talking earlier, I'm super happy also to put you in contact with someone I know who was working at a museum, and now he's producing videos. And I think that it will be beneficial for you to get to know each other, right? It also happened to me. Somebody, when I arrived to the Bay Area, and I said what I was doing for work, and I was not able to do it for work because I had what I call a trophy wife visa, meaning my spouse was allowed to work when I was not. They put me in contact with a lot of people in the field, and these people generously helped me to understand the field in the US, coming from Mexico. So I think that you need that also. for this thing thought of who can give you the light or the perspective from the museum world so you can work there. And also design firms. I'm working on a project now that needs a videographer. We have it, by the way. I'm not offering you work, but who knows, in the future we need another one like you, right? So it's good to know who else, right, can do this work. That's really cool. We have more questions, actually.
Yeah, well, so there were a couple questions about how, when you are starting out, by the way, hi, Rain. How when you were starting out, how do you develop revenue sources? And also Heidi asks again, when you're starting out, where do you find work? RFPs, cold calls, networking, something else. So when you're first starting out, it really sort of feels it's you against the world. I know. So maybe Sari and IMPs, I don't know. Do you if
I mean,
you
I think
turn
there's,
back-
I think you're like, yes, and you do everything. The one thing I never did was cold call. I just didn't think it was helpful. I did go to conferences and literally at like in the exhibit hall, every table of any firm where they might want to hire somebody like me. I had a conversation with someone. I actually did not get work that way. But I did a lot of things, and I'll tell you one thing I did, which is a little different, but I did work outside of the field. So part of it was looking at my skill set. My best friend is an instructional designer. And when I went out on my own, I was worried that I would not have enough work to support. And I'm one person, I have to support myself. I don't have a spouse. And she said, oh, you can do instructional design work. The work you're doing for museums, it's interesting, sort of what you were saying, Todd. She's like, your skill set will port over. I just have to show you what it is. And then she got me hired onto a project with her. So I've been independent for 11 years. And for the first 5 years, a percentage of my work was outside of museums. I also have friends, like I have friends who work at Harvard, I'm in Cambridge, and people hired me to do writing work for different projects, like writing case studies for the Harvard Business School. So I was constantly trying to build my museum practice, but I took my skill set and I realized not everybody has skill sets that are as transferable. And I just let everybody constantly know that I was looking for work. And as a side note, when I worked outside the museum field, maybe it's more like this, several times people said they loved working with me because I always turned everything on time when I said I was going to. And I said, isn't that what people do? And they said, no. And so I didn't realize how much leverage I had just getting shit done when I said I would. So there's some career advice for you. And that was shocking for me. So that's what I did. I didn't just do museum work. And I now I've stopped doing non-museum work several years ago. I've been, knock on wood, fully booked for several years with museum work only.
Thank God.
I mean, it's interesting. It's paradoxical, because especially when you're starting out and you're trying to support yourself, I think it's kind of tricky. Like I know people who are independent people, and basically they say, you know what, if there's a paycheck attached to it, I'll take any job. And to be honest, even from the start, I did not feel that way. I was like, you know what, if it doesn't seem like a good job, or it doesn't feel like the right vibe, I just did not take that. And I'm still alive and kicking, and I'm the primary breadwinner in my household. And so it kind of, it doesn't contradict exactly what Sari said, but I think, part of this, and not to sound all woo-woo about this because I'm a science guy, but part of this is having a sort of faith about your work and your ability to find work. That doesn't mean you don't have to look for it all the time, every day, but I think it's a little paradoxical. I think maybe it relates to what Ampi said earlier about finding your niche. If there's a paycheck attached to it, I do not automatically think that I'm going to take that job. And maybe, well, I don't know if I've been lucky or you make your own luck. I've been in the museum business for over 40 years, and half of that has been as an independent. So, anyway.
I will add, yeah, I will
You're
add.
starting out, how do you push against these problems?
Yeah, I have several things in my head about this question. And first, any business takes 5 years to take off. So be patient. That will be my first thing that I will say to anyone. And by the way, I run an accelerator for young entrepreneurs. So I'm trying to tell you this with a lot of love, to this community and whoever wants to learn about business. It takes 5 years to get to this place where you can have sustainability in your business, right? To go solo, etc. But then it goes back to pricing models and agreements with your clients and the type of projects that you can do, right? So I've been very smart to get retainers fees with several projects, and that has given me not only the opportunity to sustain myself and bring money, right? But also to know that I have those streams of revenue that are very stable. So other things that are less predictable can come along or not, right? Because there are a lot of projects that you need to finish it to get fully paid or 60% paid or whatever. You need to pay rent every month or eat every day, right? So it is this balance and your pricing model and your agreements with your clients. So the question will be, what can you do with your project that it's better to price it or to offer it in a way that you have a monthly payment than a chunk of 30, 40% or 40, 60 or whatever you're charging, right? And the type of work you do. For me, those are other things on the money side that I will share with you. Besides, hustling is part of, right? And this connects with another question on, should I do RFPs? It's also, there are projects that I see the RFP, I cannot do it. I'm not a designer. I can come up with ideas to make museums super cool, but I'm not able to draw, right? So, and Paul knows, Paul, I need you for this project. Why don't you come? Are you doing this thing? Yes, no. Let's bring these people that are designers. So
But
I'm strong with others.
it's interesting, Ampis, you mentioned RFPs because I think that's another place where it pays to be selective or even picky about responding to RFPs. Some RFPs, like you can just tell by the way the RFP is put together. You're like, wow, if the way people put this RFP together is indicative of how they're going to work together on this project, I don't want to have anything to do with them or the project. I mean, I don't mean to be snotty about it, but I think that you need to, even in the case of RFPs, not just look at it as like, whoa, great, because there is a lot of work that's expected to put together a good RFP. And I always ask up front, how many people did you send this RFP to? If they say 10 or they say 100, that also makes a difference as to how enthusiastic I am about the RFP. Some people, it feels like they dropped their RFP out of a plane over a football stadium. It's like, I don't want to be part of a cattle call. I want you to have done some homework and say, oh, this person, Ampis, she knows about looking at things through a lens of inclusivity. That's what this project wants. Not like, oh, I'll just give my business card to everyone at the party and hope somebody, responds.
Oh, I'm going to totally jump in on that because I totally forgot the best piece of advice besides relationships. And it was my best friend, Stacy, the one who pulled me into instructional design when I needed some other work. And that was great, by the way, because it's complementary work. So I learned some skill sets. But when I started out on my own and she was out on my own, she said, and I apologize in advance for the language that some people might not be as comfortable with, but she said, never work with crazy. And when you work on your own, and she said, it's never worth it. She goes, I don't care how much money they offer you, especially when you're independent, that if you get the sense that somebody's personality or work style is very, very difficult, and it only comes up once in a while. Like it's literally just in a blue moon, we're in a good field. But she and I actually were going to work on a project together, and we got pretty far into the proposal process, and we kind of looked at each other and we backed out of it. We were like, just getting responses to this proposal is raising red flags all over the place. And we were like, it's not worth it. So
follow your gut.
yeah. So part of the networking thing is also about, and relationships, trying to sort of draw a circle around this is, you want to protect yourself as an independent museum professional, kind of financially in your work, but also emotionally, because a very, very difficult client is like, you're going to be lying in bed at 2 a.m, wondering what you should have done better.
Donna Braden, hey, Michigan in the house. She has a good IMP question here, I think. What would you say is the top priority social media platform to let people know about you and your work? LinkedIn, a website? Is there an order like first do this, then do this? Ooh, can I start with that?
Yes.
The question resonates with me a lot. I'm big about thinking about online. What I would suggest, and the way I think about my online presence, is I think of my website as the hub, and all these other things that I do ultimately drive people back to my website, which is like the mothership for information about Paul Orselli and Paul Orselli Workshop. You can find out other cool stuff on LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, X, whatever it is now, for how much longer I stay in that. But it all, like, I think of it, like if I was to draw a diagram, I would think of my website as a hub, and then these other things as adjuncts that all ultimately can drive people back to the hub. So if I do a blog post or I do a LinkedIn post and it resonates with people, they can be like, yeah, who is this guy? What's he about? Go to my website and find out. So if you were thinking about starting the process from scratch, and if that idea of the hub and spokes or hub and network resonates with you, I would say make sure you have some central place. It might not even be a website. You might say, you know what? I'm going to commit my LinkedIn profile to serve that purpose. Great. But you better make sure you have a great LinkedIn profile.
Yeah. And also the activity in LinkedIn, I'll jump on that, like Margaret Middleton, who I mentioned. Margaret is super active on LinkedIn. Like Margaret is posting, Margaret is reposting other people's posts, Margaret is commenting. Like, it's not just like your profile, but it starts to feel like you're engaged with the community on there. And so you could go look at Margaret and see what they're doing, I think is a great model.
Thank you so much. And we are at the top of the hour, and I want to be very respectful with everyone's time. And first of all, I want to give a big thank you to Krista for helping us to make this webinar possible, to Paul and Sari for sharing their knowledge with us today and accepting to be part of this webinar. Thank you so much.
Hey,
we
and
will
if
vote.
we didn't get to people's questions, you are more than welcome to email us or follow up with any of us,
Yeah.
and we're happy to follow up with you, I think.
Yeah, and please
Agreed.
respond to the survey that help us to improve these programs and to have ideas from you. What else can we do to share the knowledge from other independent museum professionals that have expertise in whatever you're looking for? Join the listserv. That's the best way for you to connect with others, to find your advisory board, to find your coworkers, to find examples of people doing social media, connecting, staying in the radar, right? So that's a great way to do it. And next webinar that we will have is Mistakes Were Made, Small Business Edition, because this is a oldie but goodie. And it will be on November 13th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Pacific. So stay tuned, stay connected, and thank you so much for being today with us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.